Yeah, so this is the fifth community dialogue, the Earth Regeneration Study Group, and we shared about cultural scaffolding for Earth regeneration. And so it would be nice if facilitators, especially of the first round, can give us um, summary of what was shared and the main question or curiosity or issues that arose from the discussion. And then, of course, if Joe wants to address some of them, since there wasn't a space during the webcast, and then, and also like the other times, whoever wants to share and speak. Also about the process we are using, because we want to make it more participatory, and we would like next time maybe that the question will be submitted by you before, and then we can have a poll and choose the question that people that are most relevant, because we just guess what could be useful, but it would be nice if we can do it in turns or do it together by choosing with a poll, something like that. So any intervention also about the process we are using, the way we can improve it, it's really welcome. Who wants to start? Yeah, Ellen, go ahead.
Okay, I can start. And unfortunately, it was me and Anita Manuel here. Jason, who also has an iPad, something called Little Red, was in and out with some computer problems. So for the first question between Anita and me, whoops, goodness, what happened there? Am I still being heard?
Yes.
Yes, we can
Oh,
still hear
okay.
you.
Somehow it says the host stopped my video. So,
Sorry.
oh, okay. Well, anyway, here I am. It says unable to start video because the host has stopped it. Don't you like my face? Oh, well, anyway, I'll speak.
I like your earrings. Those are nice
Thank you
earrings.
very much. You can't see them. Those are the wrong earrings. That was like years ago. And my hair color is very different.
Sorry.
Oh, wait, now we can do it. All
Yeah,
right. I don't know what happened. Anyway, here I am. So Anita had really good question. One question was, what's the best way to start conversations towards regeneration with somebody whose internal dialogues are just like they don't even consider this? And Anita gave a nice example of trying that with a young person who just, no, I live in a different world and so forth. So how do we plant the seeds? And I think it's an excellent question. And another answer to it is because of the large numbers in our like 1,400 or so, Joe, of our on the where we type with each other study group. It feels a little bit fragmented, like we don't know we have in common, and maybe some smaller groups around things we have in common might be useful. So, and unfortunately, we couldn't get Jason in on the first round.
I have a brief answer to the first question you posed, Alan. Is that appropriate for me to put that forth right now? Okay.
Please do.
Cool. Yeah. I think just reminding people that our bodies and minds came about in a natural world, and that the regeneration of the natural world is the regeneration of a context that is just natural and healthy for us to thrive in. Yeah.
In other words, sharing it in the context of health and nature and natural, and maybe somehow demonstrating that to whoever you're offering it to. I've shared this with a few people, and it kind of planted the seed, and I think they put their names on joining the Earth Regenerators, but they each found something else to do instead of joining us on Saturday. So just kind of try to not push them away, but just invite them. Yeah. Thanks, Max.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Alan.
Are there any other facilitators that would like to go? Or if anyone's thinking of stepping in, I could
Anna?
speak a little to something
Sorry.
that Ellen said, but I'll wait and let the other facilitators go first.
Yeah, Anna. Yeah.
So regarding the first round question, we talked a lot about how cultural scaffolding as an idea can really infiltrate every part of our life, from the small things to the big things. And it also includes the natural world, but also the physical, the spiritual. And then the conversation kind of continued to unfold, and we kind of arrived at, so my question was about music, and we arrived at a question that is, what is the music for earth regeneration? And a second question was, what are some different examples of changing our lives to be regenerative? Because Joe, your example, your story is a really profound one that can guide a lot of people, but it's not going to work for everybody. And so we're all thinking, what are some other ways we can do that? And I wanted to ask a question that, because my mom joined me on the during the presentation on Saturday, and she was specifically wondering, like, here are some cultural scaffolding that we have to disassemble. What are the cultural scaffolding to assemble in the wake of those disassembled ones? Like, what kind of a parallel that's going on that we could change to this?
Thank you, Anna. Anyone else? Any other facilitators that want to? Yeah, Ross, please. We can't hear you. It looks you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. No.
Yeah, having some technical problems there.
Anyone else while Ross tries to adjust? Vivek?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think for the first question, I think we spent a little more time just introducing ourselves, but I know one question that emerged was like, what would, I know Joe's brought this up a few times, so like, how is there any bindingness or dependency between cultural scaffolding and religion? You know, it's like, because, you know, at least, you know, for a lot of us out here, we're kind of in this individualistic society, but I know Lucy mentioned how she went through kind of a monastic Buddhist experience, and I think that may have provided a lot of structural support and scaffolding for her. She's gone on to do other things. And I guess for the second question, as far as mentorship, I think, you know, there's some that are practical of themes of like, you know, if I want to say select a place I want to, you know, try doing more regenerative work, and it's like, is that the right one? Kind of a theme of perfectionism. And then some were just, you know, kind of just, how do you escape? You know, how do you know, it's kind of the same theme you've gone through step by step of like, you know, okay, can I, if you've done the same job you've done forever, you know, how can I finally, you know, push that away to, you know, go have more participation? And then for the third question, what is your fear? There were a lot of responses, but Kiala had a really good one, and it was kind of, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but it was about if you have kind of some pre-existing traumas and you try to rush into, you know, doing this type of work, like your traumas may just reemerge if you don't really try to address them first. So that really stuck out in my mind. Yeah.
Thank you. And Ross, did you find a way to? No, unfortunately. Or
I'm just loving what's coming up here about the deconstruction of scaffolding, or the need for bridge scaffolding, where you're like, I have structured ways of doing things, but they actually take me in the wrong direction, or they put me into cyclic patterns. very Buddhist types of Dharma patterns. I think that it's really important to learn how to recognize the developmental direction or the teleology of a cultural scaffolding process. So if you look at something like going to high school with plans to go to college and getting a degree in college with plans to get a job, you have a scaffolding process with a teleology, which is, without it being made explicit, to become a servant of neoliberal capitalism. And so if you understand the pattern development process, then you can be more selective about scaffolds to dismiss. As like, oh, that scaffold goes in the wrong direction. So I think there's some really powerful ways to develop that discernment that we can explore together.
Yeah, and growing up in a specific teleological structure, which would have more or less shamed people for exhibiting behaviors that were not in line with that teleological structure, is kind of what manifests in the sense of doing that, having to do the personal work. Because, you know, when you're trying to embody a new way of being, you're suddenly having to reconfront all of the ways in which you were clamped down upon by a structure which was not sympathetic to that different way of being.
I think Julian raised his hand before.
Yes, thank you, Diego. I was in a group with JP and Gail, so I just thought I'd report out on some of the thoughts and questions. I think on questions, I think there was a recurring theme of each of us are transplants in our respective countries, you know, coming from different countries, and some of us have moved around quite a bit. And so there was this emerging question of, well, how do we relate with these ideas, on these ideas of regeneration and so forth, with the other peoples and cultures that we are in, the communities that we are immersed in. And, you know, for some of us, there was some discomfort about the notion of authority and legitimacy of the ideas, right? Coming from where they come from. I raised the question of, you know, if I were to bring these ideas back to my home country of Singapore, you know, how would that be perceived, right? Would they be perceived as Western ideas, even though, you know, what we're talking about here is really quite distinct from what we consider sort of like the neoliberal Western worldview, right? But I just think by nature of the people, the folks who are on these conversations, they do seem to have a more of a predominantly North American or European concentration. And then there were, in terms of fears, we shared, 2 out of the 3 of us shared fears of how we would align our families, family members around on these thoughts and ideas. And is it ever too late, you know, particularly with teenage kids to steer the ship? And I don't think so. I think there are ways. We didn't really have time to get into that, but I think there are ways to engage different peoples of different ages. And also another fear or question was, particularly given my group where we have been nomads or global transplants, you know, how important is it to settle down on a piece of land and build that connection to land, right? Because we've been talking about bioregionalization as really the starting point or important starting point on how to think about implementing regeneration. So that implies some sort of connection to land. And I think it's an open question for our group, at least, because we've been, for each of us, we've been traveling a lot and we haven't really built that connection to land, at least. Yeah. So pause there.
Thank you, Julian. I think Ross managed to.
Yeah.
With sound. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I think it just needed children to shout loud enough. So can I just check? Are we to share from all 3 questions at this point?
however you feel, whatever you think is valuable to share.
Okay. So yep. I'll just go through all three of them. So from the first one, we were looking at questions about cultural scaffolding. I think my question, if it would be a question, was really just to see if the way that I feel I'm understanding it at the moment is correct. And this has probably come from conversations with lots of people in the group, seeing it as like pathways, or the way I described it was escape routes, to go from our current kind of lifestyle and context into something else. And then so I was in the chat with Tara and with Svetla as well. Svetla was looking more at how we could replace things in our current system for regenerative alternatives. And a specific example was co-housing, something that we can, kind of slowly transition from one to the other. And I think for both Tara and Svetla, what came up, which I think other people have talked about as well, is how do we do these things without escaping, to use that phrase. So within the current context that people live, so within cities and towns, rather than, as I was describing it, you leave those places, how can you create regenerative lifestyles and scaffolding within that? Then in our second question, followed on very much from that the main request was, how would you find a community of like-minded people who can, so within that context, particularly where you're in a town or a city, how can you find a community of people who can support and get you to that place? And I think I'll just quickly speak to the last one, where is your fear? So for me, it was it sort of boiled down to the unfamiliar. So a change of context means removing myself from the community that I know, from the landscape that I know, and yet I feel like that's a good thing to do. And then some other good ones from Svetla and Tara. So Svetla was saying, what if everything begins to fall apart too soon? Was one of her fears. So if we don't manage to find ways to do things, or before everything starts to fall apart, or what, more personally, what if I never get to do it? What if I don't find my own place within that? I think that's all of my notes. If I've missed anything, I'd ask Tara or Svetla to add into that.
Thank you, Ross. And Joe?
Yeah, I'm just loving the richness of the flow and the spread of diverse conversations that have happened in the last hour and a half. One of the things that came up in our group that was really powerful was the role of personal loss of loved ones and cultural clarity that arises when we see the world as it really is, instead of in the distractions of busyness or distractions of fears that are sort of more superficial than what really matters, which was a powerful way of clarifying. And we came to a place of talking about therapeutic scaffolding, specifically scaffolding interventions that are therapeutic to help people deal with pain and loss, trauma and grief, as part of the developmental process of becoming regenerative. Something that I've heard come up early in the conversation, or in the sharing that Ellen was sharing from her group, that I wanted to just give name to, is I also feel like the Earth Regenerators study group is too big and is now very incoherent. It's got more than 1,400 members. Some people have been there from the beginning, and other people have been there since the last week. And they're all in very different places in their journey. So we need to look at restructuring that study group in two ways. Because the original structuring was around sharing book chapters for my manuscript, which I get very little feedback that anyone is still reading. So I don't get the sense that new people coming in are actually going in and reading those materials. Or if they are, they're not posting or commenting. And so there's no developmental process to give support to because it's not made visible. So I think there's a real need to structure a scaffolding process from those of us who have been in this longer to help those of us who are joining more recently. And I think there's also a need for creating sort of architecture of functional groups for identification, which we've already role modeled with the parenting group. So I think that there's something about creating focus areas where people can self-select in to get the role modeling from others about how to be in the group, that those smaller groups can really help with. So we just need to figure out what they are. So those are a couple of pieces that I also see. I see this as being, we could become something like a design group and not merely a study group for this cultural scaffolding piece of actually brainstorming together and experimenting with scaffolding for the study group, which also becomes scaffolding for ourselves. So I think there are a lot of ways we can direct this community dialogue with this. But I see we're at time and I just want to be mindful of not going over by too much. A few minutes is fine, but not more than that. So I'd just love to hear if there are any other sort of like burning thoughts or things anyone else here would like to say before we start before Diego takes us through a wrap up.
Alan?
Yeah, I just was only answering the first question. So from our group, I didn't want to miss the second and third questions. Just briefly, for the second one, Jason was able to join us and had a very clear wish to connect with people who could mentor who have successfully established eco-villages. In other words, what does one do first? Does one gather people? Does one gather funds? Does one do it in some other ways? And Anita was able to share some resources for that, but I wanted to throw that out to the group because that's a really great question. And then in terms of fears, unfortunately, Jason, we lost you for that one, but Anita and I are both in the, I don't know what category, over 70, and we each have health issues and health fears of running out of time in some way or another for whatever reasons we have. Chemical sensitivity, or I fear becoming totally disabled as I was in one time before a certain condition was figured out and managed now. And that we were just aware that we care so much and wish to go further, and yet, you know, you never know when is our last breath, and we want to have things be able to fulfill in time. So there's a sense of urgency, and time is of the essence. And I think I'll stop at that point.
Yeah, so I think we have to wrap up. And I don't know, Joe, if there is a place where people can post more on the website. I'm gonna post the video, the YouTube video of this final session, but maybe you have some other ideas of.
Well, it's a good question. Something that I'm starting to feel is significant is to develop a cultural scaffolding section in the study group. But I think that most members would not know what it is. You know, it needs a little bit of introduction. And so there's an opportunity for all of us who have been through this webinar and have now had this discussion to share ideas. So what might be good is for us to have a place where we can brainstorm together. And I want to suggest a place because I've already created one, which is within the study group, there's a working group for the Earth Regeneration Fund. So if you join that working group, there's a topic called social learning processes, which is basically cultural scaffolding. And so we could post ideas there to start a discussion about designing cultural scaffolding for the whole study group as a network. Because what the study group is striving to become is a learning support system to scaffold people's regenerative lives. And so, and we're all learning how to do that. I definitely have insights into how to build community to create the conditions for collective intelligence. but that doesn't mean I know what that collective intelligence does. That's what we do together. So that part I don't know. Yeah, that's the part that I really need all of your help with. And so, so that would be a place that we could do this in a more sort of posting ideas, engaging in discussion, and going down the rabbit hole in a more holistic way. We could do it in that place.
So I'm going to post there the video recording, and I'm sending the link to what Joe was saying now, that it's the topic, into the group for the Earth Regeneration Fund. So everybody who didn't have the time to share some of the question of the group, like Anna, or want to add something, I think we can keep the discussion going there. And I'm really happy of how it went today. There were so many more messages in the chat, and I like that if we try to make this more participatory, actually it works, because it feels like there is readiness to do that. So any ideas or how to improve that is welcome. And thanks everybody, and we'll see each other soon in the next Zoom call.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you, everyone. So beautiful to be in the conversation with all of you.
Thank you, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks, Diego. Thank you, everybody.
No, take good care.
Good night,
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Where's the